Hi, welcome. I'd just like to use this video to provide a quick tip about using gradient mappings in Photoshop to inspire and get some new styles for your images. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how to use gradient maps, how they work. And I want to preface this by mentioning how I sort of got inspired to do a video about this. So for a while I've been using a plugin from Topaz Labs called Topaz Restyle. And basically allows you to restyle your images using different color maps. And it works very similarly to how gradient maps work in Photoshop. The controls are a little bit more fine-tuned. Let me just first of all show you Topaz Restyle, and then we're going to move on and talk about gradient maps and how to use them. So here I've got an image that I downloaded from Adobe stock.adobe.com. If you're a Creative Cloud subscriber, you usually get a discount on the images, or in my case I pay $29.99 a month for 10 stock images that I can license. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Photoshop. I'm going to click on my image and click on filter. I'm going to go down to Topaz Labs and we're going to take a look at Topaz Restyle. So it takes a little while to load the previews for the image. I think larger images take a little bit longer. This is a pretty large stock image. All right, so let's take a look. I can browse through different styles here. You can see the preview, and what this is really doing is coloring the image. And essentially what it's doing is providing a gradient map, and you can see the colors over here on the right in the color style panel, and you can adjust the colors here: primary color, the hue, the saturation, the luminance, and you can actually adjust the image as well afterward by adjusting temperature, tint, saturation, and so forth. This is great, and it offers you very fine-tuned control over the style. And the other thing I like is it's not overkill. You'll see when we start using some different gradients in the gradient map in Photoshop, it can be a little bit overkill in terms of color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Photoshop and show you how we can achieve similar styles for inspirational purposes. I'm going to hit cancel to get out of this. So here I've got my stock image. One thing I noticed first of all is that the shadows are very dark and we got a very bright white. And the idea of a gradient map is that it's going to map the luminosity levels in the image from darkest to brightest. It's going to map them to a new color set. So I'm going to go into my adjustments panel and I'm going to hit gradient map. And you can see it's applied a default gradient map with the black to white. So the darkest levels go to the left side, which is the black, and the brightest colors go to the other side, which is the white. So I've gotten a black and white image. If I hit this reverse button here, you can see that the darkest values go to white and the brightest values go to black, which is sort of like taking the inverse. But there's something interesting I can do to this image here using this reverse gradient map. If I switch my blending mode to soft light, you see what that instantly does is it brightens up the darkest point and it darkens the lightest point in the image. So let me turn that off and turn it back on. So this is a really interesting way to use a gradient map to sort of achieve some sort of balance between shadows and lights in your image. And perhaps this is too much. Maybe I do want a little bit more drama here. I want to make that a little bit darker. All I need to do is adjust my opacity slider or my fill slider equivalently. So maybe I prefer something like that. Now, don't be afraid to stack these gradient maps. You might have one gradient map. We'll use this one for achieving that sort of balance between lights and darks. And I'm going to add a new gradient map on top of this. And maybe I want to achieve some sort of color styling or tonality to the image. So let me just pick one of these color gradients, this green to red one. Now you can see what's happening here is it's mapping the darkest points in the image to red and the brightest points to green. It looks pretty bad. It looks like a really bad Christmas image from Paris. So what I'd like to do instead is use this to style the image, to maybe color certain parts of the image. What I can do to achieve that is simply change my blending mode again. I'm going to change it to color, and you can see now that it's colored the brightest spots green here and the darkest spots red. Now this is a little extreme because we've lost the original color in the image. So what I'm going to do is pull back on the opacity to achieve a style. Now this looks very similar to what we might have seen inside of Topaz Restyle. So you're getting some ideas here. I personally like to use soft light. It tends to be a little bit less harsh, and you can usually crank that up quite a bit. If you use some of these other hard light, vivid light, they tend to be more harsh. Usually there's a sweet spot on the opacity for each blending mode that you can get to by changing it. So even with vivid light, this looks really, really harsh. If I tone this down, there's sort of a sweet spot where I can get something from it. But in general, I tend to stick to soft light and the screen mode as well. Screen is nice because it does provide this lower contrast look. It gives you a little bit of a matte feel most of the time. Now, one last point I'd like to make is if you're having trouble deciding on gradients, don't forget you can click on this gradient and make your own gradient. So if you'd like to style the image so that the shadows are, let's say, blue, you can go here and make them blue, and the highlights orange, and you can go here and make those orange, and you can have a two-tone sort of look. I'll change this back to soft light to make it a little bit more subtle, something like that. Don't forget that soft light does both the darkening and the brightening. So what you're seeing here is that that deep blue is actually winding up darkening our shadows and undoing what we did with the black and white gradient. But if you're going back to what I was saying, if you're having trouble picking a gradient, Photoshop actually includes a palette of gradients that you can use for photographic toning. So let me just get rid of these. I was just doing some experimenting, which is why I had some extras. I'm going to hit New Gradient Mapping, and I'm going to click the down arrow here to see my gradient palette, and I'm going to hit this gear icon with the down and go to Photographic Toning. I'm going to hit OK to replace my current gradients. You can always get your original gradients back by clicking on the gear and hitting Reset Gradients. Now what Photoshop provides in this, again, photographic toning palette, I'll just do that once more so you can see, is they provide you with toning gradients which might be typically used for photographs. So sort of like maybe a blue palette where the midtones become blue, sort of a cyanotype. So if I hit that, I get a cyanotype. Now this is the normal blending mode, so there are some use cases for normal blending. In fact, many of these photographic toning gradients work well with normal blending mode. Now if I switch this to screen, I can get some different effects. This is maybe a little bit too bright. I can pull back on the opacity. Again, just always think about both the blending mode and the opacity to get some inspiration for photographic toning. Or I could switch over to soft light if I want at 100%. Now you can see I'm getting some blues here in the midtones, but really because there's so much dark and so much light in this image, we're not seeing a whole lot. You can also check out overlay. Overlay is a little bit harsher on the darkness than soft light is. So you see that our blacks are really getting blown out here, but we are getting more of the blue. So play around with some of these blending modes to see what you can come up with. So that's it for today. Don't forget to visit my website, MatthewKramerArt.com, for more updates and Photoshop actions, backgrounds, things you can download. Thank you for watching.